What we've done is we have traveled around the world to come together in Kathmandu to initiate a series of discussions about what might be surprising outcomes if we took concepts from Buddhism and artificial intelligence of love and science, and instead of compartmentalizing them, actually combined them. So we are 10 people from disciplines that normally don't speak to each other. Buddhist studies, technology implementation, artificial intelligence, computer science, evolutionary biology, cognitive science, storytelling, and people that are helping us to record this and bring it to others. So these are groups that normally don't talk to each other. Like, are there things in common that we can use to describe those that are useful and predictive and that provides an advantage for that? Now, what's interesting, of course, is that you set your initial intention around that, but when you add more people, and in particular, Chokyi Nyingma Rinpoche, a very senior Buddhist leader and practitioner, then all sorts of surprising things happen, and a number of surprising things have happened. So the purpose of this program was to take what we've done so far, the paper Care as a Driver of Intelligence, that says that care isn't just a nice thing to do, but it provides an advantage. And what we found out has been really surprising. My name is Bill Duane, and I've had a bit of a non-traditional career. I've spent many years in the technology industry, in particular about implementing technology, both at consulting firms and then for almost 10 years at Google, working on production engineering.
My name is Mike Levin. I'm a professor at Tufts University and also an associate faculty at the Wyss Institute at Harvard. And my group studies unconventional intelligence. So we're interested in various types of cognition, problem solving, information processing in a wide range of systems, from cells to tissues, organs, of course organisms, but also swarms and colonies.
My name's Richard Watson. I'm at the University of Southampton in the UK. My original training is in computer science, but I've been using computational methods to try and understand the algorithm of biological evolution.
My name's Pranab Das. I'm a professor of physics at Elon University. I have lately been involved in the study of intelligence of all kinds. So I led a large program to analyze intelligences in animals, in machines, and in human beings.
Hi, so my name is Lisa Elizaveta Solmanova. I'm a researcher at McGill University in Montreal, and I study eclectic things. I work in the division of social and transcultural psychiatry, where I work primarily on sleep and dreams in relation to embodiment, social world, but also I work on weird forms of sociality, like imaginary friends, sense of presence, the way that we are always in context with other people, and how culture, context, social world, relationships basically shape who we are, and how those relationships and contexts and cultures also change the way that we experience our subjective life, including our dreams.
My name is Iman Gurung. I grew up in Manasulu mountain area. I studied there till my primary school, and then I walked 2 hours a day to my school. And then when I got a scholarship, I went to Peking University to study medicine. I practiced there 1 year as a doctor, and then after that, I did 1 year research fellowship in European Neuroscience Institute, studying neuroendocrinology. Then I got a Gates Cambridge scholarship to do a PhD in physiology in the University of Cambridge. After that, I spent another 5-6 years doing the research in cardiac arrhythmia. And then I came back to Nepal after earthquake of 2015 to work as a government advisor for the rescue and relief operations. Then after that, I've been in Nepal doing various political advisor, as well as some of my own private enterprise development.
So my name is Thomas Doctor, and I live here in Nepal now. I came to this country first in 1988 and had the good fortune of meeting Trygve Rinpoche already at that time at the monastery in Bodernat, Kanningsjætobling. And that really sparked my deep and continuous interest in Buddhist teaching. So I've tried to learn some Tibetan, try to understand and practice as much Buddhist teaching as I could since then. So that also meant academic studies in the West. I did a degree in Tibetan and Sanskrit at Copenhagen, and then went to do a doctoral degree in Buddhist studies at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland.
So my name is Olaf. We have a small institute, a few people working on the nature of intelligence in contact with, I guess, artificial intelligence and artificial life. That means we do research academically, but also very close to real problems in current life, and also in a very special space that is Japan, about how to automate and understand how AI can be close to us.
My name is George Musser. I'm a science writer and editor for different science magazines in the US, Scientific American, Quanta, Nautilus, and I'm the author of several books on basic physics.
So it is really hard to find people who are experts in their respective disciplines, who are disciplined researchers and disciplined scholars, who then also try and achieve deep knowledge and deep understanding of other domains.
This event that made me want to come here are related to two fundamental things that we're doing in our lab. One has to do with the idea of regenerative medicine and the idea of radical empowerment of not only human patients, but basically every living thing to improve function. So this means improve birth defects, it means resolve missing or damaged organs after injury, it means cancer suppression, maybe aging, those kinds of things. And the other thing that we work on is biological novelty and the plasticity of cells being able to build other things than what their default state is. So for example, you can take standard frog cells with no modifications of their genetics, and under specific conditions, they will create a novel proto-organism we call a xenobot. And these xenobots have some very interesting capabilities, behaviors, shapes, and there are deep questions about where do those come from, because of course, evolutionarily, there's never been any xenobots, right? And so and some of the things that cells and tissues can do, and in particular, solving various anatomical shape problems are well beyond a kind of hardwired, well, this is what they always do step by step, and it's guided by their genome, and that's that, right? So we see a lot of phenomena that are well beyond that. And so we need to understand those. And besides the purely scientific challenges, which of course there are some great people here to discuss that with, but the other side of this is the ethics side. And so really important is the idea that the ethics of these things should not be just focused around what typically happens in bioethics, which is ethics around potential dangers. So potential dangers, the misuse of the technology, things like that. This goes far deeper, because what we actually have the opportunity here to do is not simply to avoid making things worse, which is kind of a standard bar that people hope for in science, that just don't mess it up and don't make it worse. We have a much bigger opportunity here, which is to really elevate the status quo, and this idea that there's massive need across not just human populations worldwide, but animals and others, for various kinds of improvements in their health, improvements in the potentiality for them to reach their full expression of life.
So I've been interested for a long time in something called active matter. This is a different sort of material where even the littlest bits do something. So if you think of a body, for example, it's made of cells, and the cells are made of molecules. And as you look closer and closer at the parts, they each seem to squirm around, they do things, they have motive force. an underlying question about how things that are built that way works is what makes them care about each other? What makes them care about the whole organism? Does your cell give a damn about whether or not you survive? Well, you could say yes, because if you didn't, then the cell wouldn't have a happy home. But there's certainly more to it than that. White blood cells get together, for example, and fight infection. They have to care about each other. They have to care about other tissue that is unrelated to them. So there is a remaining open question as to why we care about what we care about, and by we I mean all agents, large and small.
I think that the Buddhist approaches that are being studied here have a really unique angle on this. And so the central focus on two things, one being compassion and the other being for all beings, right? That word is doing a lot of work here, and I think it's super important because that means not just human patients, that means not just the existing living beings that were naturally provided by the sort of stream of evolution on Earth, but all possible beings. And so that includes a huge number of diverse intelligences that will exist very soon. Some of them already exist, but they will exist. We're talking about cyborgs and biorobots and hybrids and hybrids and all kinds of novel creatures that have never existed before. And I think it's absolutely foundationally important that as we launch into this work, which has massively positive implications for human flourishing, that we really approach this with an idea of compassion for all beings, right? I think that's foundational to the science we do. So that's why this meeting, this is one of the best meetings I've ever been at, because it's really allowed us to drill down into that foundational issue and get novel perspectives for it, not from just the typical Western philosophies that we all sort of are familiar with, but also this Buddhist framework.
The idea of generalizing those ideas beyond our biological survival and reproduction, but to our, when we think about a corporation or a business and it's what's the purpose of it? Well, it's its growth, it's its survival, and it's such a pervasive mindset that it's difficult to get away from it in how we view one another, how we view our role in society, what we think society is for. The basic setup of everything being driven by competition, even cooperation is driven by competition. It's cooperation in the service of your group being able to outcompete another group. And when you look at the global challenges that we currently face, whether that's poverty and wealth disparity, or climate change, or biodiversity loss, all of those problems are caused by short-term self-interest or greed for shorthand. If only we were able to act in a way that was more to do with our long-term collective interest and less to do with our individual short-term interest, those things wouldn't be such problems.
Subjective experience has been moderately studied by science. In history of psychology, behaviorism as a sort of behaviorist school as a reaction to psychoanalysis, for a long time has basically discouraged scientists to study anything subjective. And for a long time, and even now I think this persists, there has been this idea that people don't really know what's going on in their own experience, that we don't really know our own minds, and the only way to truly understand the mind is to understand the brain, which I think obviously doesn't make any sense, because if you want to understand the mind, you might want to ask people what's in their minds. And in that respect, techniques from philosophy, phenomenology, and also from Buddhism, from contemplative science, from contemplative studies, from contemplative practices, help us reach some of those depths of subjective experience that neuroscience not only can't, but never will, simply because that's not the right object of inquiry.
But there are some questions that are hard to answer within that framework, such as, well, a classic question in that framework is the evolution of cooperation. Why do entities cooperate with one another if they're supposed to be driven by self-interest? And a classical answer to that is that, well, if they're part of a group, then the group could do better if they were cooperating than if they were selfish or they were defectors. But then the question arises, oh, but how did the group arise? Why did the group become a thing? Well, one way to think about it is that there are necessary conditions for a Darwinian process to occur. You have to have a population of things which are not all the same, and those differences need to matter to their survival or reproduction, and those differences need to be passed on to the next generation. So that's called variation, selection, and inheritance. And if you have suitable variation and suitable fitness differences and suitable inheritance, then evolution by natural selection works fine and does all sorts of cool creative things. But then that leaves the question of why was the variation suitable, and how did the inheritance become suitable, and how did the fitness differences be suitable? And there's still explanatory work to be done there. Then the Darwinian process can't explain its own axioms that way, like any theory can't. So there's still significant scientific advancement necessary to fill those gaps.
I think this meeting surprised me in a number of ways. It enlarged my thinking in a number of ways. So thinking about evolution of the natural world in terms other than the standard Darwinian natural selection account, I didn't even think that was possible, given what we've learned since we were small in school about biology and about the diversity of the natural world. We've come to think of natural selection as the epitome of a creative process, and to know that there's other creative processes, perhaps even more significant, the creative process that comes from learning, that we've recapitulated here, in fact, haven't we, by learning from one another in a way that's parallel to what goes on in the natural world. So that was a huge mind-opening thing for me. I was surprised and gratified also that people in this community who have known each other for years, have worked together on papers, took me in as though I were a member of the family. So I was deeply grateful to the welcome that I was extended when I was here. A lot of the communication we have in science, or as humans in general, is nonverbal, or it's casual, it's little remarks here, little eyebrow raising there. And so I got a lot out of this conference from those moments that are hard to articulate. It's hard to put your finger on what knowledge I gained, and yet a knowledge was gained in that moment. So also the personal exchanges. We lose sight in many intellectual areas of the need for human contact, for personal exchange. It's not a utilitarian sharing of information. It's also a development of a relationship. And I think we've had that this week, and we'll continue to have it because we're only partway through this event.
I would like to address that in two ways, like how does this academic work like that will contribute to the well-being of South Asians and East Asian perspective. I mean, yes, at this modern political conflict, they are very separated from each other. But if you go back a few thousand years, both South Asians and East Asians, we are emerged from this Buddhist and Vedic cultural history. But in these 2,000 years of history, more or less, we have all forgotten about the philosophical background that we had. Now we have more people who understand a lot about the Darwinian concept, or the Hegel's Marxism and Leninism and Adam Smith model than what the Buddhist and Vedic philosophical framework has contributed to us. Right? First and foremost, this sort of workshop empowers these people in the whole of the Asian regions, that these traditional concepts that our forefather has been advocating has some implication in modern use. But when you look at the concept itself, it has a tremendous potential to contribute for the humankind, and in a way that every day always think that we ourselves is by ourselves, and we do the best for whatever we can for ourselves. But at the same time, our own reality is shaped by the so many people around us. The dogs walking in the street, a bird chirping in a tree, some angry man passing by you, it shapes us, our reality, our life. Right? Unless and until we can find some model of intelligence that takes into the account of the view and the viewer both, it is hard to build a happy society. And care as a driver of intelligence is one of that theory that can provide the philosophical background. Right? Currently, our society has a lot of conflict. The geopolitical and economic, racial segregations and economic disparity, all those different kind of stressful situations. We need to find some sort of philosophical framework to address that. If only we can establish care as a driver as intelligence and stress, care, intelligence loop as a philosophical framework, we should be able to address a lot of this conflict within the society. And when you can remove that stress and conflict within the society, the human flourishing will emerge out of it.
After a meeting like this one, is you look at what people are doing and you get excited and you want to do exactly that. You want to collaborate with them and yes, let's create this biological hybrid. Maybe let's interact with this other specialty and go into psychology or psychiatry and make those experiments that push the limits of what a human is able to do. Maybe you are going to measure what a human is capable of doing by just measuring, putting a bunch of electrodes and measuring what we're capable of doing. I guess every interaction within the meeting gives you a concrete example of what crazy stuff you could do if you just change a little bit your perspective. If you change a little bit the way you think about the same problem, maybe you can do something drastically different.
There's a long-standing area of scientific inquiry that's sometimes described as complexity theory or emergence studies. The question they ask is ultimately, why is more different from fewer? Why is the sum greater than why is more different than fewer, and why is the whole greater than the sum of the parts? Why does a flock of starlings exhibit this beautiful patterning flight when only a few starlings won't? Many interesting approaches have been tried and few are fully productive as of now. It's one of the great open areas in science. So part of that question is, why do the parts care about each other? And how do wholes care about parts and parts care about wholes? So if you think that intelligence is the capacity of a whole to do something interesting, then what you're really interested in is figuring out how the wholes and the parts get together to create the capacity for being intelligent. So this workshop really centers on that focal question. If you care, does that give you the capacity to do new stuff? Does it make you smarter? Well, look, the basic problem of self is solipsistic. We only know ourselves. Everything we do is introspective on some level. This has proved to be a problem in the history of science and certainly in the history of humankind.
A typical problem in AI we're faced with is, I guess, the integration of AIs within daily lives. I guess there are two opposite, almost, applications that we have in Japan. One is manufacturing, because that's the center of the industry in AI. And because of the aging population, there's a lot of the AI effort that is for the help of aging people and elderly and different people in different health situations. Both are about robots or artificial forms of intelligence helping humans. on the one end, they're helping people manufacture something, doing something concrete, and making stuff. On the other hand, it's not about making stuff, but we're helping AI help people.
And it's really funny here at this conference, we have people who are very technical experts who are so excited to be here because they get to actually try and operationalize the L word, right? And so I think this method of compartmentalization, the 20th century, has been a huge experiment of, okay, what if we assume that there's an atomic self that operates solely according to its self-interest? And we've had this great experiment of doing this, and we found it's been amazing in all these areas and insufficient in these others. And I think AI in particular it stands on the shoulders of all this amazing work that science and technology has done, while also highlighting the areas in which it's not meeting our needs. And there's something about the automaticity of AI that makes us especially fearful with sort of a magician's apprentice kind of thing, right? So for all of these reasons, it seems like just even to ask the question of what would be like if we actually looked at love as an active part of these systems. I think we have a huge data set of where we've come over the last 70 or 80 years that shows this is what happens when we do it. And maybe those systems are so baked in that even the idea of not doing that seems weird and dangerous. But you know, I think the inflection point we're at in the world, not just with AI, but in general, shows like, okay, maybe now is the time to be active about this and do some experiments about this. And you know, the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves is saying, hey, let's do some experiments around this. Let's actually bring in experts. And you know, if you're like me, you're like, oh, love, what is it going to be? Hugging people and, you know, and kumbaya and all of that. But I think the real operational question is, what if we didn't let go of our rigor? What if we were able to have our cake and eat it too, and look at the benefits of science and then also extend it by including these areas of love? And so we're like, this is the Kathmandu Valley behind me. One of the ways of doing that is actually to situate yourself within the context of a culture where this stuff flows from the taps much more readily than, say, it does in European or American countries. Like, we're literally situating ourselves in this context where we have access to not only Buddhist studies scholars, but Buddhist leaders who can help us draw these maps between how might we develop frameworks that have testable hypotheses that include love as a causal factor, and then test them, and then see if they work, right? To not keep that idea of science is predictable, love is made up. So Chokyampa Rinpoche's involvement really comes, I would say he's one of the founders. So he was having conversations with Thomas Doctor about AI, and Thomas was really surprised that Chokyampa Rinpoche was very interested in AI, being that, you know, his world is Buddhist studies. So Chokyampa Rinpoche had what seemed to Thomas a very unusual and intense interest in this. So responding to that interest, Thomas was like, well, what if we actually did some academic research around, are there concepts from Buddhism that are applicable to AI? And then of course the reverse is also true, is what can the study of AI do to inform Buddhism? And so that's been his involvement. So I would say he was in some ways the initiator of this work. And then now that it's reached some maturity, is now rejoining the work stream to then give everybody who's involved in this effort sort of direct access to the Buddhist teachings, as well as some opinions about how they might apply to some of the problem areas.
This meeting really is a culmination of a wish, a dream that I've had for at least 7-8 years. Because I came just surfing the internet, I came to understand that just how I began to get a sense of how far AI research had come, and that there was serious efforts made towards achieving a sense of artificial self in artificially intelligent networks. So I also learned that the expectation was that this would enhance intelligence, make it more powerful, and make it more stable and in line with human concerns. So, of course, from a Buddhist perspective, that it would not be the expectation. Quite the contrary, that with the emergence of self comes attachment, aversion, craving, and anger. So, yeah, it made me think that if ever there was a time to let Buddhist knowledge and practice come forth and be sort of applicable in the world in general, then this would have to be it. And it would also trying to think of how Buddhist views and practices could be useful would of course also be a very profound way of informing our understanding of Buddhism. So not only the reason that I thought it would be meaningful to have a dialogue or a sort of collaboration really beyond dialogue between AI and Buddhism was that Buddhism does not assume the existence of a self that is singular, enduring, and in control, just as AI science in general does not assume the existence of such a self in an artificial network. So there is this apparent common ground in terms of the basic view that there are no such selves, but then with AI in sort of rough terms, we could say, being interested in conjuring such an appearance. And again, in rough terms, you could say, from the Buddhist perspective, it's more a matter of seeing through an apparent self, seeing its irreality. So a sense of a common ground, but also separate, contrasting expectations about the utility of self. And then also Buddhism being a deeply ethical system full of meaning and love and the things that we otherwise may associate self with and have a hard time imagining a world that is deeply meaningful, a world of love and care where there are no selves. So since that is really the Buddhist project to say that this is possible and there are paths to accomplishing that at very advanced levels, but also on a general level in society for being a happy and well-functioning society. That made me think that there must be a basis for real, profound collaboration.
Rinpoche was talking about emptiness suffused with compassion, and I didn't know what that meant when I got here. I was familiar with the idea of, the more that you grasp for things, the more you try to hold on to things, the more it falls through your fingers and the less value it really has. And if you let go of everything, what does that mean? Does that mean we let go of everything, I don't exist anymore? Nothing matters anymore? I should just go and sit under a tree and meditate and not do anything? What does it mean when you let go of that grasping? When there's emptiness suffused with compassion, what does that mean? It's like, am I just out of the picture altogether and there's just a sea of love left? That seemed like a concept, it was a concept that I wasn't familiar with, and at the beginning of the week it felt like a concept that I couldn't make any sense of. And as the week has developed, my understanding of that and a sort of profoundly impermanent sense of self without that being nihilistic has matured a little.
So that's what brought me here, questions of obviously selfhood, questions of ethics and relational aspects, and of course questions of what kind of beings we are when we are faced with novel forms of technology. I mean, technology is not new. We've always used technologies. Glasses are technology. prayers are technology, of spirituality. We've been technological through and through ever since, you know, culture existed. So yeah, so these are not old questions, not new questions. These are old questions, but these specific ones today have to do with understanding of selfhood. And I'm very interested in philosophy of embodied mind, right? The philosophy that embodied mind and in activism that understands humans as always already in context. And our minds and our bodies and our world are not reducible to each other. They're in fact processes of interaction with each other. And this way, you know, as culture, we already distribute our intelligence among various forms of experts. And now as culture that is mediated by technology, well, we also distribute and incorporate into our own bodies technologies that we create for various purposes. So those questions, I guess, brought me here to this meeting.
Through the discussions at this meeting, there have been a wide range of synergies and interesting ideas. Just to sort of pick on one was this idea of that Rinpoche was talking about, which has to do with this notion of inauspicious birth, and the idea that not everyone is born into a form in which they can pursue the path of self-perfection. And this idea that we are all born into various circumstances, meaning the type of body we have, the shape of potentially limitations via birth defects or other kinds of limitations. And even in a sort of what they call a genetically wild type scenario where the body is exactly how that species is, fundamentally there are massive limitations depending on who you are and what you are. And this idea that it is incumbent upon us to help all beings advance, and this idea of viewing regenerative medicine and repair as a kind of freeing from the cycle of genetic determinism, of the fact that you are born in a form that isn't necessarily fit to your needs. It's just what the natural world has happened to give you. It wasn't planned out with your benefit in mind. It's just what you happen to have. And the idea that it is on us to help all sentient beings improve that situation.
Each one of us at this meeting, I think, has brought something special and unique. Simply their individuality in some cases, or in all cases, but certain kinds of knowledge and sensibilities and temperaments as well. I think that in my own case, I come, and it's something I've had to develop over my life, with a sense of opening myself and posing questions and hearing the response and trying not to prejudge what the answer will be and trying to learn from that exchange rather than come to it with an agenda in mind, for example. So I've tried to bring that. I'm genuinely fascinated by human beings, so I just love hearing everyone's stories here. Just at the human level, let alone the intellectual level. So I think maybe I bring that kind of sensibility to this as well, and I hope that will rub off on the other participants here. Or if it doesn't, that's fine too. I'm happy either way. But that I do feel was something that I brought to this meeting.
So what I was hoping to get from this meeting was to find ways of integrating those ways of viewing the world more closely. And a good part of the, shall we say, armchair understanding of the spiritual side of things that I already had appears to be fitting well with what I've learned here and the extra depth that I have from that.
Buddhist traditions have thought deeply about the relationship between selves and others for millennia. It would be naive to think that they don't have something to teach us. So it seems to me a good job of work is to inquire after what sorts of lessons those contemplations can give us in a contemporary and technological world. So this team has already begun to craft a model, an early theory, about how caring for others, as conceptualized roughly in a Buddhist sense, produces the capacity to have more success in the world.
I've learned a lot during the past few days. It was fantastic to be able to listen to and to learn from people who are doing deep and exciting and really forward-thinking work. Of course, being in such a small group also allows us to have a lot of exchanges that are maybe a little bit less censored than in normal academic conferences. Perhaps are a little bit more free-flowing and associative, which is a fantastic opportunity to just work around certain issues and figure out common languages and figure out common interests. I've learned entirely new things that I've never thought about before about evolution and developmental biology. Certainly, even if I knew about about some of the work in those domains, I've learned about memory transfers between organisms. I've learned about alternative accounts of evolution of our species. So these are all very exciting things to think about, in particular with relation to subjective minds and our experience. These are my main things, my main tools, my main interests. So definitely always going back to experience and thinking about our experience as species and thinking about our experience as organisms, I think is hugely exciting. And yes, I'm looking forward to more conversations with everybody I met here.
From this 1 week of intensive scientific interaction with the team, as more you think about it, more diverse implication you can see of this concept of stress, care, intelligence loop, and care is the driver of intelligence. From our own, some of the prominent participants, we have already established that it has a profound implication in the development of biology. We have seen that it has a profound implications in evolution of biology, that Darwinian concept of survival of fittest cannot explain the evolutions at all. And it could be the love and care, that stress, care, intelligence loop could be much better alternative than the Darwinian concept of survival of fittest. And then we have some physicists and something that could also explain the interaction between the living and non-living being, not just among the sentient being. So it has a diverse implication, and particularly that really excite me is this stress, care, intelligence loop could also help us to understand how the emergence of the individual characters, particularly in a political context, where some individuals who start their career hoping that they can try to help everyone, right? And over the time, that character emerges and the self becomes so strong that the care for the rest becomes the secondary and the care for the self becomes the primary. And that becomes the origin of dictatorship, origin of self-centered view of the world, and the origin of the conflict. And we see now the war in the Ukraine. We see now the trade war between America and China. And sometimes we think about, more we think about it, more we come to realize that this alternative model of intelligence must be established. Otherwise, the intelligence that we are trying to develop, we're trying to enhance, may not be working for the well-being of the human being, or the human flourishing. So if we really want to consider human flourishing, we must establish a credible philosophical framework where this framework can explain, reduce the stress of every individual, reduce the stress, the conflict between the countries, community, race, and gender. Hence, I really believe that the model could, if we can establish it, could have a profound implication for all human beings. And as long as it can contribute for all the human beings, I'm pretty sure it will contribute for the human flourishing.
Well, because of the people who have joined in the project, we are able to to rethink evolution in a profound fashion in the light of Buddhism and in the light of science. We are in a position to rethink what an organism is. We started out with this sort of simple, basic Buddhist critique of a particular kind of self, which is singular, enduring, and controlling. But through this kind of negative analysis, the dismissal of the idea that there is such a self, it is also possible to be, we might find ourselves more capable of seeing what there then is. What is the way the apparent causes and conditions come together and shape our perception of each other and the world. And that is something that this expansion of the original sphere of concern beyond AI and Buddhism, leading into with biology serving as a very natural bridge between the two, and then the topic of evolution giving a historical dimension to it, the past and what we might expect of the future. It becomes a very comprehensive model of selves, time, and transformation. So I feel very humbled and blessed to be able to listen and contemplate along these lines and try to do whatever I can to contribute a little bit in a constructive direction here.
It seems that through getting surprised or through getting out of your area of comfort in a sort of violent way, you get to a very actionable space that you wouldn't get to if you got there very mildly. And I feel like that's what we experienced during this week of workshop. It's getting violently, I guess, moved away from our area of comfort. And just the I don't know exactly how to express that, but just the...
I think you've expressed it beautifully. I think there's no need to question
All right,
yourself.
yeah.
You've been moved out of your area of comfort.
Yeah.
That's been a good thing.
Yeah, something like that. But it's really, it's because it makes contact with some of the stuff I've been doing, the hypnosis or the meditation things. I feel like there is a contact between the science and how we do science and some of the practice that we do and how we do it. And in the practice, I feel like this shock is being useful. And I think we saw some of that during the science conversations.
A starting point that's based on love and compassion, a starting point that's based on the impermanence of self, absolutely makes sense of all of the problems that we had in our existing scientific framework, yes. The idea of trying to identify an objective function that would explain biological creativity, or trying to define an objective function that would make a person happy, those are deep and, I think, unsolvable problems within the scientific framework that we started from. But starting from compassion, starting from love, and trying to understand what does that mean? How do you, and what role does an intellect have in that starting place? How does it add something to that starting place? Yeah, I think it helps. It's not just about having a different attitude. It's not just about, you know, changing your heart and then carry on doing what you were doing before. But there are genuinely difficult scientific problems that are caused by the starting assumption of permanent selves. And when you let go of that assumption of permanent selves and you allow selves to be impermanent, something that comes and goes, something that's illusory, it's something that the more you try to hold on to it, the less it seems to be there. You know, the classic problem of reductionist, like, you know, I tried to look at all of the parts to see what I've really got, and when I look at all the parts, I didn't have the thing I was trying to study. Those really hard problems, really deep problems in science, I think they have solutions when you look at them the other way around, so that it isn't just a mirror, where it isn't just, you know, left was right and right was left, but it didn't really change anything. It was just a different language for the same thing, but that it's actually, oh, it makes sense now. Okay, now it makes sense. Now those problems melt away. And all the other things that we knew before still make sense.
Yeah, what I feel really has been at the forefront and deep in everyone's heart, because during these days has been a sense of us being able to actually come together in a way that creates, just by virtue of being together with an open mind and a sincere motivation to give it our best, that we have been able to achieve something that that holds a lot of promise. It sounds perhaps yeah. I feel that the potential for something quite profound change in the way we view the world, in the way we view Buddhism, in the way we view science. The potential for that kind of transformation or paradigm shift, if you want, I think is really quite palpable. And it's just been so delightful to the sense that of natural cooperation, and so that has been a huge takeaway for me, that that this natural coming together and collaboration is possible, and that some really profound change that can affect not just a few people, how they view things, and what they may achieve in their own private lives, but actually on a quite global scale, our way of understanding each other and society, the practices of science and the scope of religion, all of that is at a point of transformation, I feel.
But the thing that we can do for others as well includes radical improvement of their biological station, and the more, you know, to me, what has become much clearer now than it ever had been, although, you know, I was sort of leaning in that direction anyway, but just incredibly clear now how profound that responsibility is, and the fact that because we are now able to do it, it's only in recent years that this has even become possible. But now that we actually have the potential to try to develop these techniques, it is on us to really, with compassion, with an eye towards improving the situation for everybody and everything worldwide, we now have to develop those technologies. It's a moral imperative to do that. So that's just become super clear to me at this meeting.
This meeting, really, it could have gone wrong in so many ways, right? We could have all had COVID. We could have all not made it through immigration line. We could have all hated each other. We could have all had nothing to say to each other. None of those worst case scenarios have passed, quite to the contrary. We've broadly been healthy here. We've had wonderful exchanges just over drinks and dinner. The sessions have been fantastically interesting. And I've got a notebook full of material that I'll take back with me and process and analyze and think about for quite a long time to come, I think. And in addition to the fact I hope to keep in touch with each and one of these people that I've met and become friends with at the meeting.